Alright YouTube, it's time for a brief Ferguson update. By now, you all know, of course, Wilson wasn't indicted. On that decision, I'm ambivalent because, there wasn't enough evidence to bring it to trial. If it had, he would have been acquitted and then probably people would have rioted even worse. My thoughts are twofold. On one, I don't blame them for, not indicting Wilson. That's what I expected. And, really, they were privy to more evidence and information than the general public. And the public really shouldn't react violently. When the grand jury appears to have been unanimous, and 3 people on that grand jury, of course, were black. So I don't understand why people would, flip out over that. As far as the police response, though, it has been heavy-handed, and here's where I think that they've sort of fucked themselves up the ass. Their response has been extreme. I've seen them fire literally hundreds of canisters of tear gas. At least one of the car fires that you've probably seen on the mainstream media was actually caused by the accidental firing of tear gas, as well as at least one lawn fire, in which the police, for some reason, appear to have fired tear gas off into somebody's yard. Not exactly sure why. Maybe there was somebody there, rather than at the crowd at large. Most of the protesters have been peaceable, and it's like I've said this before. There's a difference, generally speaking, between those that are doing the looting, the vandalism, and the burning, and the protesters. And I keep seeing, this is I think the 3rd time now that I've seen on these live streams, that the militarized police are the ones tackling the unarmed, peaceful protesters, and meanwhile plainclothes cops are running around like chickens with their head cut off trying to go after the actual criminals. I don't understand it, and I think tomorrow when the nation wakes up, because let's face it, a lot of people right now are either asleep, or they only pay attention to mainstream media, they saw a brief update and went to bed or something. They're not watching the Ustreams, they're not checking Twitter or anything like that, because they get their news from the boob tube. And they actually trust what they hear, which is fucked up, let's face it. And they're largely going to see the mainstream narrative, which is, oh, these people set fire to cars and so forth. Well, that's not what I saw. I saw a tear gas shell light a cop car on fire. I saw possible arson of a civilian vehicle, although, again, it's not exactly sure who done it. A few windows broken, and I think I heard something about a Walgreens being on fire, but I can't confirm that right now. But watching the live streams, you've got these protesters, the vast majority of them are doing nothing wrong, they're peacefully assembled. The fact that one person throws a bottle is not a reason to gas everyone and start firing rubber bullets. It's not. That sort of weird collective punishment has its roots in like Israel or someplace like that. You would expect to see it there. And I think people have woken up to the fact now that the police are way too militarized, have way too much power. It doesn't matter whether it's aimed at a black person or white person. Get past the fucking racial issue, it doesn't fucking matter. People have woken up to the fact that the police are more militarized than they need to be. Federal agencies have machine guns for no reason. The IRS has too much power, DC has too much power, government's swollen, it's inefficient, it's unaccountable, it's corrupt. People understand this. That's why support for third parties has gone up so drastically. I think that they are doing themselves, the mainstream that is, like DC and the police and so forth, are doing themselves a huge disservice right now. Oh, and looks like they just got gassed again. Yeah, either that or he's being beaten into the ground. Can't really tell. I'll put the link in the description. I think he just got gassed again and he's running away from it. But anyway, they're doing themselves a disservice by repeatedly attacking these protesters when little or no provocation has been given. Because what are people going to react by? Look at Kent State and what that did during the sort of peace demonstrations during the hippie era. Look what it did. It started crushing support for the federal government as well as the state in which it happened. These people are retarded. They're making the same exact mistakes that they made in the 60s. One of the main mistakes is that at first a lot of the protests were racially segregated. It was largely black people and a handful of white college students that defended them. Very soon it became a lot of white people on their side, specifically against the government, which they saw as corrupt, and warmongering. Well, what's happening right now? How do people see the federal government right now? Are these people, is Obama a complete fucking retard? He has to be. He should know history. Holder should know history. The governor of Missouri should understand U.S. history and political science. Why are these people so dumb? They're making exactly the same mistakes. If you want to calm these crowds down, the thing to do is tell the officers to have restraint. Because if people are completely pissed off, yeah, they're going to throw the occasional bottle. Ultimately, that's not going to injure an officer who's covered head to toe in riot gear and holding a big bulletproof shield in front of him. He's going to be fine. But what if you accidentally hit somebody in the eyeball with a rubber bullet and blind them for the rest of their life? Are they going to be fine? What if it explodes their optic nerve and does brain damage or something? Are they going to be fine? What happens if someone with severe asthma who happens to be, in their yard, they're not even protesting, and all of a sudden they get hit by a cloud of tear gas? Are they going to be fine when they're keeled over wheezing and can't breathe? I'm seeing them, and for the second time here, I'm seeing, and it looks like the stream just went down. Oh, well, that's rather ominous. Okay. Yeah, I'll put the link in the description. This is Bassem Masri, or I can't pronounce it, but basically. I'm seeing them for the second time now, deliberately, and I say deliberately, not lightly, fire tear gas at the media as well. That's unacceptable. It's unlawful. They have the right to report on it. They are the media. They have an explicit right to report on what's going on there. They're not taking part in the protests. They have a big sign that says press. The cameras that are 6 feet tall kind of give that fact away. And the police are treating them like they're part of the protests. And then you have these police, again, that are overly militarized. They don't need to be. They're under no threat of assault by people that are themselves these aren't insurgents. These aren't people that are going to run up to them shouting Allahu Akbar and blow themselves up. These are protesters throwing water bottles or little chunks of rock. That's about the worst that they're doing. But I'll tell you what will happen. If they keep abusing the population and the mass corpus of the American people wake up to the fact that it's really no longer a racial issue, and it's really more an issue of government corruption and police corruption, then they will probably get shot at. Because all of a sudden you'll have every nut in the woods, every survivalist will join in, you'll have all of the citizen militias on the street corner deliberately intimidating these people, and these streets will look like a war zone. When we have people coming back, veterans from the Middle East, saying that the streets of the United States at this point look a lot like the streets of Baghdad or Kabul, that is a problem, and it doesn't need to be happening. There's no imminent threat of breakdown in this country that isn't being caused by the government itself. The government's own failed policies are what's driving people into a state of frenzied panic. There is no threat of imminent breakdown short of the one created by the government. So if there's no threat that's not being created by the fact that Uncle Sam now has SWAT teams with Bradley tanks going down the road, wouldn't you think that, relaxing a little bit, maybe giving them a little less of this surplus, making it a little less conspicuous that they've transformed small town police forces into paramilitary units, don't you think that might calm the situation a little bit more? And by the way, to people who want to make this all about race. Now, I like a good helter-skelter joke as much as the next person. But let's be clear and reasonable about this fact. A lot of these protesters are white, and Asian, and Hispanic. They're not even black. So how the hell is this a racial issue? These people are getting, what? You think that someone's white so the tear gas doesn't hurt them as much because of their white privilege or something? Of course not. They're getting shot with rubber bullets. I saw a video yesterday. Some veteran was there talking about how the streets of Ferguson now look like the streets of Baghdad or some fucking city out in the deserts there. And he lifts up his shirt. He's got a rubber bullet wound. He's chuckling about it. Obviously, he didn't have severe PTSD, or he probably would have jumped the police lines and started ripping their throats out. And there's not a lot they could do if they do that. That's another thing. What about the residential homeowners in these areas, regardless of their race, their house is now continually smelling of fucking tear gas? What about people with PTSD that now feel like they're back in the war zone because they hear gunshots all day? Well, it doesn't make any sense. It makes no fucking sense at all. The reaction by the police in Ferguson, makes no sense. Now, they were told to use restraint. The politicians in Missouri itself and in D.C. asked them to use more restraint. So not actually because they care about the issue, but because they want to save face. And they're still doing the same thing. In fact, it's been worse. And this stream's still down, so unless, well, I had it muted, he said, well, I'm going home now. Hopefully the dude's okay. Either that or he just got shot in the head and his corpse is going to be on the news tomorrow. And there's really no way to tell. The response has been ridiculous, as it has been continually, and that is the problem. Just like the response during the civil rights era, usually was far too heavy-handed, and eventually what happened, and this is the part that DC doesn't understand, I think because they're retarded, they don't understand that it got to the point where there was so much violence towards people who were largely unarmed, largely peaceably assembling, largely doing nothing wrong, nothing unlawful. And certainly what they were doing is condoned by the First Amendment of the Constitution. It got to the point where everyone tuning in at night was seeing, all they were seeing were police beating people down. And that's when it snapped. That's when our culture in the late 60s snapped. It got to the point where it was no longer tolerable to the actual person that this was going on. And the protests spread. Now, what if the government back then had reacted the way the government is now? What if they had called out the entire military, just said, well, fuck Vietnam because we need the troops over here now, and started rolling their tanks down the streets and firing at people with live ammunition? It would have turned into a revolutionary war or a civil war or something similar to that. There would be riots in every town and city across the nation. And that's what I think that's what some people are worried about right now, because right now it doesn't seem like the government's response, whether it's on the state level, the local level, the federal level, it doesn't really matter anymore, has been so heavy-handed that it's starting to bother people that aren't even in proximity to the situation. It's starting to bother, look at New York right now. Look at the protests they had in Brooklyn. It's happening all over the country. And these people that think that they're bulletproof, they're magically invulnerable to police brutality just because they happen to be white, are really no better than the black racists who are saying, well, it's only black people that are suffering. You're being the same version of retard, and you're the same version of retard as some of these law enforcement officers that act as a law unto themselves. Now, if you assume Darren Wilson was justified, that's fine, that's okay. I don't have a problem with that because I wasn't there. The evidence isn't there to charge him anyway, and I can let that issue go because I don't really give a fuck. But as far as these protests go, yes, this is police brutality, plain and simple. These people are not the ones doing the looting and the arsons. The fact that somebody commits a crime a mile away doesn't invalidate these people's right to civilly protest, to organize and to get together and march. Your rights, your constitutional rights, do not unilaterally and magically expend themselves and go away simply because somebody somewhere kind of near you happens to do something that's a criminal act. That's not the way that the world works. That's not the way that the Constitution works. And your founders would be rolling over in their graves if they heard you supporting such a view. So people need to wise up at this point. This is no longer a racial issue. This could be the sort of spark, the catalyst, that sets off a larger dialogue in this country, and we've been having it anyway now. Civil asset forfeiture is in the front lines of this fight as well, militarized police in a general sense, because people, regardless of race, feel like there's no accountability. Now, somebody like me who lives in a small town in New England, obviously the likelihood of me seeing, the cops randomly gun somebody down the street is fairly low, but it could happen here, and I'm constantly mindful of that fact. When you see a cop walk by, is the first thing you think, oh, well, I feel so safe, there's this protector here with his gun, he's gonna, if any bad guys around here, well, I don't have to fucking worry about them, I got a cop around me. Or do you get a little bit paranoid and look at the cop and be like, I hope he's not one of those cops that's just suddenly gonna start abusing me, and then when I look at him the wrong way, just drags me in and beats me for 2 hours, or just shoots me in the face because I happen to make the wrong hand gesture, or I'm worried about him, abducting and raping my wife or something like that, or I'm worried about him taking the, $500 I've got in my wallet for my rent, minus the $2 that I'm about to pay for a Powerade because of civil asset forfeiture. Which do you think when you see a police officer? That's the problem in this country. Now, I'm not saying that's a fair characterization of all police. What I'm saying is that's how people generally view them. That's the issue. It's all about how people view one another. It's not about reality even. It's about people's view. It's like DC. We all look at it and we say it's dysfunctional, it's corrupt, all these people suck. I don't know why you keep voting them back into office, because you're fucking fucked up. But they're corrupt, they're horrible, they're abusive, they're bloated, they're inefficient. They lie constantly. They don't have common sense. None of them knows really what they're doing. They're all controlled by corporations and lobbies and unions and banks and all these other groups. And that, it doesn't matter if that's even reality for most of these politicians. That's the general consensus view of DC. That's what matters. And when you've got a protest like this, these people see the police across from them as an enemy. They don't see them as a protector because they don't see them protecting anything. The only thing they see them protecting is their own. That is the government and the police themselves. That's the issue at hand. If you think that you can't get randomly skull-fucked in the head by a bullet because you happen to have light-colored skin, you are wrong. You're also living in delusion. I think there are quite a few people who ignore that fact. Now, you can be as racist as you want, but ultimately your odds of getting randomly beaten by somebody who's looting or committing arsons or something because they're just a thug or a hooligan is lower than your chance of getting randomly shot by a police officer during a routine traffic stop at this point. Almost all violent crime in this country has been falling for decades now. For 30 years, almost uninterrupted, violent crime in this country, regardless of how many guns are created and distributed to the masses, or how many bulletproof vests they buy, or how many copies of the anarchist cookbook they download, almost all violent crimes have been steadily decreasing. We're at the lowest rates of crime that we've been in this country since the days of the 50s. And yet the number of attacks by police officers on citizens, the number of times asset forfeiture has been used wrongfully, the number of times that they get surplus equipment that logically they don't need because crime's going down, it's not going up, it's not becoming a horrible problem in most parts of this country, it's going down. Why the fuck do they need these things? That's the problem. It doesn't make sense. When people's actions don't line up with reality, you have to assume either they're deluded, which is possible. It's possible the government's just completely stupid. Or you have to assume that there's something fishy going on. Well, either way, it can't be good. Why do people not realize this fact? I mean, you can look at the looters and the rioters all you want. Yeah, they should be dragged into jail. The problem being the plainclothes officers. You know, some beat cop with 2 weeks' experience is the one chasing the arsonists. All the ones with all the cool tactical gear, they're all going after unarmed protesters. In what realm of reality does this make sense? In what place does this response actually make any sense at all? This is like the sort of thing you see in North Korea or China. And all of these same uber patriots that complain about the Eastern commies are not willing to apply that same high-minded logic to our own police forces because they've got a tear in their eye, apple pie in their mouth, and a flag in their hand. Well, guess what? It's not patriotic to just simply sit there and watch obviously unconstitutional abuses get meted out by police that have equipment they're really not supposed to have anyway on the domestic population, regardless of its racial or ethnic composition. Now, does it really matter to me that these people are supposedly largely black, although half of them looked white to me? It doesn't matter to me in the least. I don't give a fuck. Because ultimately, all across the country, we've got these police officers. They can gun me down in an instant. And they can make up some complete bullshit story about why they did it. And half the time, they'll get off. The other half of the time, they'll get probation probably. Maybe once in a blue moon, one of them actually gets called into prison. They're more likely, cops are more likely to get sacked for snorting coke on the job than they are shooting somebody. It doesn't make sense. That's the problem. But no, I mean, people should be paying attention. And I actually don't think I'll post the link because it looks like it's dead. Again, ominously. I'll try to dig up some other live links for people to watch. And I know this wasn't as quick as I wanted it to be, but yeah, there you go. Vote Libertarian. Let's fucking get rid of all the bums in DC. Maybe we can fucking tackle these issues. Because you voted left and right enough times to know that it doesn't actually work. You know, if you've got a round hole and somebody gives you a square peg and a triangle peg, and you keep trying to stuff them both in the hole and neither of them ever fits, no matter how many times you try, you are retarded. if you continue to shove those pegs in the hole when the round hole, the little round peg is right under the desk, just escaping notice. Well, we've got a round hole to fit in that little, cubicle there, or whatever the fuck it is. You don't need to keep taking that square peg and shoving it in there like a fucking chimp. That's how people act when they vote for these stupid-ass two parties, neither of which has really done us any good in the past, let's say 50 years or so. I think we can make some sort of case for people like Ike or JFK. We have to go back at least that far to find anybody who was halfway honest, and even they weren't honest. They were just decent by modern-day standards. That's the problem. So yeah, Ferguson is exploding in mythical riots that I'm apparently not seeing. All I'm seeing are protesters getting gassed. I suppose some people are committing crimes as well. And you can guarantee that it's the regular beat cops with their little pea shooters going after them in their regular unarmored squad cars. Probably don't even have fucking steel-belted radials or anything like that. They probably just got fucking old beat-up 70s-era squad cars, and meanwhile all these people with the assault rifles and the combat vests, they're going after the peaceful protesters because it's so fun for them to shoot them with rubber bullets, apparently. Yeah. So that's a Ferguson update. I don't give a fuck about the indictment. It doesn't fucking matter anymore. But people will dwell on it. They'll keep it a racial issue. Right now, there are too many morons in this country that haven't really cleaned out their minds at this point to actually think clearly. Give it time. Some of these people can be, take a little bit of a red pill now and then, and maybe they will wise up and realize what's actually going on. Until then, they'll remain retards. That's about all. Peace out.